Because of the circumstances of my childhood, I didn't have a foundation of spirituality that I can recall as a child. One of my friends invited me to church on a Sunday morning, and I think it might even have been an Easter morning. And it was a church that had an altar call as part of their Sunday morning. And I remember the minister saying something to the effect of, if there's anybody here who would like to invite Jesus into their heart, I'd love to have you come forward and I'll pray with you. And I really had no idea what that meant. But as soon as he said, invite Jesus into my heart, I just felt this loneliness in my heart. I don't remember having some kind of big earth-shattering transformation, but I felt something real. I felt something real. And I felt this desire on my heart to go deeper.
Bishop Budde, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Scott. It's a joy to be in conversation with you.
We had a little bit of an intro and we got to know each other a little bit. And I think it's really interesting because we talk about the high performance life here. And one of my foundational components, and the way I list it is there's 4 boxes. If you think of love and impact at the top and faith and energy at the bottom. And I've always laid that out because I believe that faith is something that helps us stay grounded and focused and be the best version of ourselves. And it makes us better to the who's, it makes us better to the impacts. I'm interested of, you obviously are a leader and somebody that's relied upon in so many ways. Tell me about your faith journey. Give us a little bit about your journey with faith, because I think it's super interesting to our listeners.
Well, thank you. Because of the circumstances of my childhood, which was disrupted by parental divorce and some other, sad circumstances of my parents' lives, I didn't have a foundation of spirituality that I can recall as a child. And so my journey of faith, while I believe God was with me and the Holy Spirit was with me, Jesus loved me from day one, no doubt about that. My conscious journey of faith began when I was an adolescent, which I don't think is an uncommon experience, but a real longing in my own heart, combined with an encounter with my parents. I was living with my dad at the time. He was kind of angry at God, didn't really believe in God. And so I stumbled into Christian community among my friends. And one of my friends invited me to church on a Sunday morning. And I think it might even have been an Easter morning. And it was a church that had an altar call as part of their Sunday morning. And I remember the minister saying something to the effect of, if there's anybody here who would like to invite Jesus into their heart, I'd love to have you come forward and I'll pray with you. And I really had no idea what that meant. But as soon as he said, invite Jesus into my heart, I just felt this loneliness in my heart. And I thought, and so I found myself up there and he prayed with me. I don't remember having some kind of big earth-shattering transformation, but I felt something real. And I was immediately engulfed in a Christian community of people who were like cheering me on. And my friend was so excited. And I wound up in my early years, conscious years of faith, in some very tight-knit, strong Christian communities that had a very narrow view of what it meant to be saved, what it meant to have a salvation experience that brought us into relationship with God and also determined our eternal salvation, right? So that was the path. And I was immersed in that life and grateful for the support that it gave me, because the rest of my life was a little rocky, right? This was like real family to me. And there was a part of me that was struggling with the confinement of the worldview. It just felt like we were the lucky ones who happened to be on this path, and it was a really narrow path and nobody. So I was just struggling, but I didn't feel like I could talk about it with the people in my world. It just didn't feel like that would be a respectful thing to do. So I kind of lived with these questions of faith, even as I was trying to grow in faith. Then my family circumstances changed, and I wound up and I write about this in my book, I wound up making a decision to go and live with my mother. And I hadn't lived with her since I was a young child. And my mother at the time was attending an Episcopal church. And I started going to that church, even though my other church was saying, don't go there because they're not among the saved, right? You will backslide into sin, the pastor said to me, if you spend too much time with the Episcopalians. And I knew my mom, right? And I knew my mom was a loving, God-loving woman. So I kind of knew that wasn't true. But I didn't want to be disrespectful because I love these people and I love that church. But to suffice to say that I found a community in my mom's church and a place where I could bring my faith and my growing desire to know Jesus. And also, I could ask questions and I could struggle with doubt. And also, I didn't have to feel like everything in my faith life had been worked out, right? I had a sense of I was on a journey with God and that I could come up every week to the altar and receive a blessing from him, right? And from Jesus, because we, like Catholics, have a sacramental faith. Then I went off to college and I worshiped as a Roman Catholic for many years because there was a very strong Catholic community there. Was deeply inspired by the Catholic witness in Central America. This was during the Central American Wars. So suffice to say, Scott, that by the time I was a young adult, I had experienced grace and God and religious expression across a wide spectrum of Christianity. And I felt this desire on my heart to go deeper and also to do something of significance with my life. And that resulted in my seeking ordination in the Episcopal Church. And this was about 5 or 6 years after women were first allowed to be priests. So I was kind of not in the first generation, but the second. And I was accepted and I was ordained very young and married while I was in seminary to a Roman Catholic, and we've raised our children in both traditions. So I came out of all of my childhood and my young adult life with a deep appreciation for the wide spectrum of Christian life and belief. Not a lot of desire to spend time arguing about things, but trying to find the good and the strength and the truth embedded in each, and also recognizing the foibles and the sins of each, right? Because none of us are perfect. And I was, like you said, I was a parish minister for many years. I also did a lot of work in Central America and other parts of the world. And then in 2011, when I was in my early 50s, I was elected to be the bishop, which, as you said, has a kind of a stewarding role of a geography of congregations and the Washington National Cathedral. So I hope that's answering your question. I could have,
No, that's
obviously I
great.
moved out a lot, but that's sort of the arc of how my spiritual life has gone.
Well, and the Episcopal faith has a more of a democratic,
It does.
way about it, right? So you are a representative to not only the people you steward for,
Diocese.
but
Yeah.
also across the country, you have a voice. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. The way most people who come into the Episcopal Church for the first time, to be honest, think it's a Catholic church because the sacramental life, the rhythm of worship, the way people dress, the vestments and all of that, it looks very Roman Catholic, except they'll see me as a woman, right?
Right.
Or they'll see a married priest with kids and they think, okay, there's some differences here, right? And so we've maintained a very strong sacramental and sort of hierarchy of symbolic authority. So as a bishop, I have a lot of symbolic authority. But to be honest, as you said, the way we govern ourselves is very democratic. And that's the Protestant side of the Catholic Church, of the Episcopal Church. It has its strengths and weaknesses, right? It's not like the kingdom of God, believe me. But it does mean that I was elected bishop by the people, right? I'm accountable to the structures of the diocese. And I'm part of a body of bishops that have a role of being representatives of the Episcopal Church across the country. So yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you moved back in with your mom and you started to
Yeah.
go on this faith journey, and it seemed to be a turning point a little bit because you had been introduced
Huge.
and
Yeah.
you felt this emptiness that you wanted to fulfill, and you started to receive what you were looking for, but you decided to start going with mom. Did it bring you and your mom closer together? Having not lived with her,
Oh,
how did that impact your life?
well, it's the primary. I describe it in my book as the archetypal moment, the decision of my life. It's the moment where I felt my decision to go back to live with my mother, and all that led up to it and all that resulted from it. It is the moment where I begin my relationship with God in Christ. That was because, as I alluded to earlier, there were very few adults in my life at the time who thought it was a wise idea. There was a lot of energy for me to stay. I was living in Colorado at the time, and my dad was out of the picture, but there was a lot of energy to keep me in Colorado. And a part of me really wanted to stay because it was my friends, my school, my boyfriend. I mean, there was just a lot, the church.
Right.
Um, and then there was my mom. And I just had this sense that that's where God wanted me to go. And it was the first time I consciously listened to that inner voice and trusted that and moved on that. And also, and this is going back to my mom, also recognizing that I was coming back into a world that I had consciously left as a young child, which hurt her deeply. And I knew that I needed to enter her world. Um, and she welcomed me. She loved me. We established a relationship that began in my late teens, and she was in her late 40s, right? And we're very close. In some ways, I had to learn how to be her daughter. She had to learn how to be my mom. But we also had a common faith life because she had become very deeply um, moved in her own spiritual journey with God and active in her community and living a very intentional life of faith. Now, we both had wounds, we both had trauma. It wasn't all easy, believe me. There was a lot of struggle in those years, but there was never a doubt in my mind that that's where God wanted me to be, and there was never any doubt in hers. So that gave us and she's 92 years old, and she now is. I am her prime. I have an older sister, but I am my mom's primary caregiver, and I'm glad. I'm really glad that I can be
Yeah,
her person, right?
it's
Yeah.
really, yeah, it's beautiful. And I think it's always interesting to me as we grow up when we realize that our parents are also imperfect. And that's a
Yes.
turning point that's very difficult for children to go through. I have teenagers right now, and believe me, they know my imperfections. But at the same time, there's an expectation of perfection until
Sure.
a certain point, and it may be when we become parents ourselves, right? It may be like
Yeah.
you become a
Yeah.
parent and you start to see and realize that imperfection exists in ways that you never imagined. And the older I get,
Sure.
the more I have these moments where I go to my parents and I'm like, oh man, I am so sorry for this. Or yeah, I called my mom a couple of weeks ago and I just said, hey, I wanted to thank you because the spiritual journey that you took me on when I was a kid, you don't
Mhm.
realize how impactful that is to the foundation of who I became. Not
Yeah.
only like who I'm becoming, but who I am today is
Yeah.
so it's so important that the foundation, what you talked about not having, was something that so many of us take for granted when we're young.
Right.
We don't even
Right.
know how special this is. And
Right.
the older I get, the more connected that is. And you see your families, a lot of families come, closer together. Some go further apart, but it's definitely a beautiful thing, that imperfection and that connection to that faith all the way back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say too that because um, I also learned through my dad, who was um, who was not a great dad, right? I mean, there was just, and I say that with all love, but I mean, just in terms of the skills of parenting, he really wasn't a great dad, and he had a lot of things working against him. But one of the things too that I learned through through everything in life was I needed to have the best possible relationship I could have with him, which was different than the relationship I could have with my mom, because she had so much more to she there was just more that was possible. But I learned that I wasn't, it was sort of that sort of honor your mother and father thing, right? Like I had lots of reasons to be mad at my dad. I had lots of reasons to be mad. And in time, and particularly as in my adult life, I came to the realization that I didn't want to carry any of that. And I wanted to genuinely not only forgive, but love. And how could I love my dad? Um, Even though the way that it was possible to love him was much different because of who he was, right? So there's a poignancy to love. I love how love is part of your impact, your life, your quadrant, um, and that because love is for the sake of the other, right? Genuine love is for the sake of the other. And one of the things we have to learn in growing up is what that looks like. And when we've been genuinely loved, and when God invites us to love others for who they are, and that's a lifelong journey, and
Yeah.
you learn in different ways, right?
It's interesting to me when you talk about love. It's so interesting because we grow up expecting um, it to be shown to us, and what we
Hmm.
realize when we find love is it comes from within. It comes from giving, and this is
Yeah.
such a fundamental thing. Most marriages struggle with this, especially new. And
Mm,
we all go through this. I mean, I went through it, and it's like, hey, why don't you do this for me? Why don't we do this?
right. Right.
And it's it's the taker mentality, which is the opposite of love.
Right.
I
Or
love
the
the. Go ahead. I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, I was gonna say, or the complete me mentality. I need you to make me whole, right? Which, and it's actually we we whatever wholeness we're given comes from within that we share with one another. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, no, you were great. And ultimately, all I was going to say is it's why Corinthians, and I don't know
Mhm.
the exact numbers, but it brings you to your knees when you hear love is patient, love is kind. And if you're at a wedding or a funeral or
Yeah.
anything, and
Yeah.
it's read, everyone in that room
No.
always feels that they could love better. They could love
Right.
deeper. There's something we could do differently. And it's such a powerful, um,
Right.
it's such a powerful reading that I often think when I think of that quadrant of love, it's the who's in my life that matter most, the who's in my life that provide me the energy in
Right.
life, the ones that I want to give of myself to,
Right.
and all of yourself, so that it's something else. And to your point, if we don't love ourselves, it's very difficult to become loved, and so
Right.
that's very, very challenging as well.
Right.
But
No.
I digress. I'll move. I just was
No,
interested
no,
in your
no.
point.
It's so, I mean, it's so that passage, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It doesn't insist on its own way. It doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Believes all things, endures all things, hopes all things. I mean, it never ends, right? That's the passage. And it is, I agree with you. Sometimes couples say, well, it's the one that's read at every wedding. I want something else. And I'm like, why would you want anything else? Because it's like,
It's perfect.
it's perfect.
It's
Yeah. And it's
perfect. Yeah.
always challenging. It's always challenging. And I think for people like me, who have like a role in the world or a role in a community, more mostly for me, a community, there's this one line that says, if I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but I have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal, right? Like you can be doing all the right things. In other words, you can be even giving away all that you have, but if you're not doing it in love, yeah. So,
Yeah, and it takes work, right? And so anything
oh,
that takes work, you feel purpose in. And
right.
so I've said this on the podcast before. If you listen all the time, often talk about the 4 eulogies that I've delivered for all 4 of my grandparents because I'm very proud of it.
Mm,
But my dad's mom was so kind and so nice, and I really didn't know her in a way that, because you would walk in And she was one of those people that she'd ask you all about yourself. You'd talk about yourself.
Mhm.
It was such an aura and energy about her that when I was looking for the words, I actually ended up reading that because I thought, there's nobody in here that knew her that didn't walk into the room and feel better. She
Right.
symbolized kindness and patience, and
Yeah.
what might have seemed simple at times. Grandma, what else do you want to do? Not, she was wanted to do whatever you wanted to do. And
Yeah.
so that was such a powerful thing to read. And it's something that's anything that you could reference in the beginning of one's life, the beginning of one's most decisive moments, or even the end
Yeah.
is so powerful. And that's what makes
So
it
true.
such a great line, such a great reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you think about growing up the way that you did and having that well-rounded faith journey, um,
Mhm.
do you find as a leader in your community, do you find it easier to connect with other clergy and to come together in the community to do more, to be more, to kind of unify in some ways, which
I sure
sometimes,
try. Yeah, I
yeah,
sure try. I really work at that, Scott, because um, first of all, I'm a I'm a really big believer in focusing on the best of each strand or tradition and not dwelling too much on the obvious sins that we might point to or the really divergent places of disagreement, not to deny that they're not there, but not to focus on them when we come together to hope to believe in the best, just as I would as a human being, right? To acknowledge with some humility the same is true for my tradition, very true. And to find whatever it is that God might be asking us to do together that is for the common good, you know, which does mean putting aside. Um, I was going to say personal agenda, but it's even more than that. It's more a desire to force people to conform to something that we think is true. And even if I do believe it's true, right? If I go into public ministry or the public arena with that mindset, it's almost like I'm using people to using that. I want to do what's good for them, and I'll leave to God all the other questions about their relationships to God, their understanding of God. And if we're working on how to come together to promote better public safety, if we're coming together to pray for peace, if we're coming together to grieve something that's happened in our community, in our world, how can we show by our relationships, our friendships, our being there for one another that we don't want to be part of the problem. We want to utilize what we have to be part of the solution. And I straddle a broader spectrum than many. And I find that out because there are sometimes when I bring people into common conversation, um, I, I get criticized or I get chided for allowing people who have really divergent views into the same room because sometimes it's just really painful. But but I just feel like I that's just the way God wired me, and also the way my life experience went. So I'm just not going to. I just can't not do that. But so yeah, it's the best I can do. Um, Let me just add that there are times, however, and they're not often, but there are times when the opposite is true. When I feel what's God put on my heart is when I actually have to say or do something that I know isn't going to land well with everybody.
right.
And I don't like that. I'm not a naturally confrontational person, but I also know that sometimes I need to do that and let the disagreements be what they are and try to stay in relationship through them. Right.
Yeah, during Lent, I listen to the Hallow app every day, and
Mm-hmm.
it's an app. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I've probably referred this app all denominations to so many people
Yep.
because it makes it easy. and
Yeah.
it can fit into your day. And it's something that when you're starting to go on a journey, it's very powerful, to the point where, my whole family listens to this now, and my
Mm,
best friends
okay.
listen to this now. And some of them have not been engaged or involved. And others, like my mom, who called me this morning and said, "Hey, did you listen to the message this morning?" And it was about a young girl who had cancer and had met Mother Teresa at a very important time in her life where she had no chance of survival. And it
Yeah.
tells the story of her miracle. And it was a
Mm,
super interesting um, concept. My mom calls and she goes, I want to send this to one of my friends who's going through cancer right now, and she has 2 children, and I just
mm.
don't want to come across like I'm pushing it. And I said, you know what I found? She was having lunch with her, and she listens to this, so she'll appreciate that I'm mentioning it. Um, she 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 might not, I don't know, but
Hi,
she
Scott's
said,
mom.
yeah, this is a very authentic podcast. The goal is to be open and authentic, and to tell real
Mhm.
life stories, and that's what makes it interesting, in my opinion, to listen to. That's what people
Good.
want to hear, the real version of your childhood, of your life, and what led you on that journey.
Right.
And
Right.
so, make a long story short, she mentions to me that she wants to share that, she thinks if maybe she would go into church and join the community, in some capacity, she might feel a little bit more of what she's missing right now. And I said,
Yeah.
I don't know the right words to say, but I said, Mom, what I found, and it's just sharing this Hallow app, has been a perfect example. I'm not worrying about how someone receives the information. I'm just sharing my story. And if I'm making
Mhm.
it about my personal journey, people are interested in that. They want to understand that. And so if you just say, this has helped me, then I feel like it's so much better received. And what you're talking about, to me, when you're coming together and you're bringing people together that maybe sometimes don't come together, or maybe
Mhm.
get chastised for bringing these different groups together,
Mhm.
you never know who's going to cut through
That's
the
right.
message that someone needs to hear in that moment. And that really requires a lot of different ideas, a lot of different ways. There was no one way to Christ. There was no one way
Right.
in that journey.
Right. Right. No, that's really well said. And and I believe that to be true. And I will look up the Hallow app as soon as we finish our conversation.
It's the number one downloaded app. They did a Super Bowl ad this year, and
Uh huh.
it was number one out there. And Father Mike Schmitz did the Bible in the Year podcast, which has been ahead of Joe Rogan and many other. And all
Mm-hmm.
he's doing is reading the Bible. And so there's a resurgence in, which is a great lead into the next question. I'm noticing a resurgence that I haven't seen in a long time in
Mm-hmm.
in traditional services. I have great friends that are at the Episcopal Church here. I have great friends that are at the Lutheran Church. One of
Mm-hmm.
my good friends is a Baptist minister of one of the largest
Mm-hmm.
churches around us, and the Catholic Church that I attend. And I've just noticed that there seems to be more bums in seats today than I've seen in a while. And I don't know if you're seeing that trend as the bishop and in the market that you're in, which is a very, very
Mm-hmm.
big market. But
Yeah.
I'm interested
Yeah.
in two parts to that. Number one, if you're seeing that resurgence, and number two, what do you think it's because of?
Okay. Well, I would say of the 86 churches that I have most direct um, knowledge and engagement with, it's uneven. That there are some churches that are experiencing exactly what you're experiencing, and there are others. And I think the pandemic was an accelerator of this trend. If they were on the path of really significant decline, that the decline is accelerated, and so it's not a universal experience. It seems to me that a faith community needs to be poised and ready to receive people who are on a quest or are feeling a call inside themselves to seek out um, communities or venues where that spiritual yearning is might perhaps be addressed, right? And so the churches that have that outward look, that ability to engage, that have a message of faith and of hope and of honesty, right? Um, Woundedness. Those are the churches that are growing, or that are seeing more people, maybe not necessarily, seeing more people sort of check them out and to engage, right? Which is a really good thing. And it, in terms of what's accounting for it, um, I don't know that there's any one thing that I could point to, but a confluence of generational shifts and things that are happening in the wider society, the brokenness of a lot of other institutions, a um, a desire for authenticity, and then and you're mentioning, like, most of the traditions you mentioned are that more on the traditional end of things, or on the sacramental end of things. There's a similar thing happening in other branches of the Christian church, right? So I don't know that it's any one thing, but
Right.
there is certainly a spiritual hunger. I also see it, to be honest, in my yoga studio. I go to a yoga studio, and there's a lot of people in the studio, right? And I love, body mind practices, right? And I can bring my whole body and my whole faith into that room. But it's amazing to me how many people are in the yoga studio. So it's just something's going on. And there's a lot of, yeah, there are a lot of
I
reasons why we need faith and love, and, you know, a sense of not
yeah.
being alone in the world. Right.
I,
Yeah.
I think I think that you hit on the number one thing, which is a disconnection. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, I think people, there's a trick of feeling more connected when you're holding this phone, and
Yeah.
you've got it in your hand, and you feel more connected in some ways. Like, you think that you have more friends, you think people are following your story, you think these things are
Right.
happening, but the reality is we're finding that people feel more and more disconnected. So the need
Lonely.
for community is so powerful right now,
Yeah.
and to give that to your children. I think a lot of adults are kind of seeing the disconnection that we've all gone through, and all of us go through it, right? Your journey is
Sure.
not, everybody has a different journey,
Right.
but there's a disconnection that we feel. And the more, when you have children, what do you want to do? You want to provide them a better life than
Right.
you had, than you maybe
Mhm.
took. For me, some of it was what I chose.
You
And
want to, you want to have you want them to have what you had, right? You want them to have something,
right.
um, you know. Anne Lamott has a really lovely essay that she wrote many years ago, and she was a single mom, and she wrote an essay called "Why I Make Sam Go to Church," and her son is like 9 years old, and she said, Sam never wants to, Sam usually doesn't want to go to me. No, Sam doesn't want to go with me, but I make him go because I can, because I outweigh him by 90 pounds. But so she's being joking, but then she says, I want him to know what I have been given, which is a path to walk and a little light to see by, and a community of people that point me, that love me and love us and point us toward God, and who show up in the world doing whatever they can to make the world a better place, right? And I just thought, it was done in very non-churchy language, but she's describing, like, yeah, we want that. I think there's a conspiracy now that says we just don't have time. We don't have time for it. We've got too many other things going on. But once you've tasted it, it's like, oh, this is worth making time for. This is now, lots of churches can get it wrong. There's been a lot of damage done in churches. I don't deny any of that, and I know you wouldn't either. But when a community is healthy, and when it's loving, and when a person who comes into it as a stranger comes away feeling like they've been, like there was something that happened in that experience that touched them in their heart, gave them something to think about or to ponder during the week to come, and that these people look like reasonably friendly strangers, and that they might actually be, people I'd like to spend time with. That's magic, right? It's great. I'm
Well, it's
very,
like it,
yeah, I was going to say,
sorry to
I
interrupt.
feel really blessed to be able to do the work I do, because I just feel like, as I think it was Bill Hybels said, the local church is the hope of the world, and I actually really believe that. I think so much good can happen in a local
Well, it's
church.
it's it's so powerful because it's you don't know when it's going to make a difference. Like we were talking about earlier, I have
Right,
a really good
right.
friend of mine who we had a conversation, and we basically it was about, hey, he really didn't believe in anything, and we have a
Yeah,
conversation about faith. And I just happened to say, listen, I don't know how I could have gotten through the last year with everything we were working through if I wasn't just I used the word surrender. It was a
hmm,
very big year of surrender for me. And he we just kind of talked a little bit about believing in something versus not believing in something. And I just said, at the end of the day, if I'm wrong and I lived a great life and I put in time and energy, I'm okay with that. And if you're
hmm.
right, then I'm okay with being wrong. And that was kind of it. And we were having dinner and some drinks a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and he said, that really made me interested, so much so that I downloaded that app. I've been listening to it every week, and it's completely changed his point of view on something that was very, very open to him. And
Right.
the best part of that story is we had gone as children. I had taken him all the time to mass on Sundays because my mom had a rule. She would make us brunch or breakfast or lunch or anything, but we had to go. Whether it was Saturday night or Sunday, we had to go. And so he would go with me to eat. And so, to make a long story short, he'd come with us. And so he shared with me the most powerful part that he enjoyed was the shaking of the hands when people offered each other peace. And he said it
Hmm.
always made him feel like he was part of something bigger. Like it was just this
Yeah,
really great part, a part that I never had thought of as powerful as he stated it.
yeah.
It was
That's
so
really beautiful.
interesting to me.
Really beautiful. And I love the first part of your story, Scott, because what you demonstrated is a kind of humility that said, you're standing by your conviction, the principles and the faith upon which you live your life, and you acknowledge that you don't have all knowledge, right? But that you have made your peace with that, and that you are open to being wrong, right? And that gives people space. I think it gives people space to say, okay, he doesn't have, he's not just discounting me and my experience, which made him, it sounds like, more open to you and your experience because you weren't insisting that that you were absolutely right and there was no other alternative. So
Ha-
I'm just
has there ever
so
been an
grateful.
argument that someone says that and it actually goes over well? I mean,
Never.
if my wife
Ne-
says you're right to me, that is like her saying something ugly to me. That is not a nice, you're right,
yeah,
you're right, you're right. That is not what I want to hear. If I hear you're right, I
right.
know that I have said something that she disagrees with, that she's probably saying you're right is a nice way. And that's a funny part. But yeah,
Right.
being right, I love the saying, you have a choice in life. You can be right or you can be happy, but you can't be both.
Or I heard this past week someone say, there's nowhere that Jesus doesn't ever say in the Gospels that your job is to be right. That your job as his disciples is to be right. That it's very clear that if we are followers of Jesus, our job is to love, right? And that just hit me so powerfully when I heard that as a reminder that I don't have to prove anything. My job is to love people as Jesus loves, and and that's it. Right now, I have convictions. I'm going to live by them. I'm even going to try sometimes to persuade others that they are, that they're true. But I don't have to prove it as if that were my life's goal. So it's we're on the same
How,
wavelength in a lot of ways.
I'm interested. You have a pretty big diocese. You
Hmm.
you have, obviously, we talked about over 80 um, churches, and then you have the schools as well. what do you do to gain any level of separation? So I hear you did yoga in the studio.
Mhm.
What are some of the other things that you're doing in your spare time to
Hmm.
that you do when you have a little bit of outside of work, even though your work and your
Right,
life kind of go hand in hand?
right, right. So places that feed me, that remind me that I'm not just the bishop, but I'm a human being and a child of God. I would say, like a lot of people, I suspect you are the same. I get a lot of joy and release from being outside and being in nature. I love to ride my bicycle. I love to hike. I have two grandchildren, and I tell you, there is nothing that kind of takes me out of my work anxieties than spending time with them. I mean, really, spending, just being on the floor playing with them, going on adventures with them. Um, every once in a while, I love a good movie, and I confess I can watch a good, Netflix series for a while and just get lost in somebody else's story, and I find that refreshing. Um, and I'm blessed to have people in my life, not a lot, but a few people who have known me through thick and thin and known me through many different public roles, right? And so they know me as Mariann, right? Or they know me as mom, or they know me as their daughter. My mom's still alive. And being in those places and allowing myself to lay down the role um, is very life giving.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things that I do a lot of is, I spend a lot of time exercising,
Mm-hmm.
sauna, cold plunge. I do a lot that is extroverted, and I'm out and I'm giving of myself and a lot of energy. So a lot of times to recharge, I'm actually doing things that are very internal. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I use my sauna, I use it every morning, and I use that as time for prayer and deep thought. I get in the cold plunge every day after I exercise. I go on long walks, and
Mm.
these are the things. Yeah, I know you have questions about the plunge, I'm sure, but
No,
um,
I'm from
oh,
Minnesota. I watch people
oh,
do it in the lake. Oh,
yeah,
God.
I've done that
Yeah.
too. I did it in multiple places like that, and it's amazing what it does for your body, and it centers me because being present right here. I'm great if it's a conversation. I'm great if it's another human, but sometimes not just thinking, being that visionary and thinking so far into the future is hard for me. So when I'm centered like that, it
Yeah.
really helps to kind of frame the day. So
Yeah.
I love watching my boys play soccer. I mean, that's the number
Oh,
one. That's
yes.
the number one thing for me is doing that. If I could get into the game, I would, but I'm too old and never good enough compared to them. So that's always a challenge. And then my wife
Oh.
and I have a great relationship. So,
Mhm.
we we like to travel. I like to travel more than she does, but we like to travel, and we like to eat at good places, and occasionally
Mhm.
see a movie. But mainly just family stuff. I mean, we still have a Sunday dinner every Sunday with my mom at my mom's
Mm.
house, and our siblings come over and their kids come over, and we keep
Mhm.
that tradition going. We're very blessed to have that family unit so close, and
Mhm.
I think that's something else. The older I get, the more I want to invest in, the more I'm excited about that next generation. You're describing grandchildren. I'm just getting to the
Mhm.
point where we're going to see our boys grow up a little bit and see what
Right,
they
right.
produce and become. And it's fun. It's
Mhm.
a fun part of life to hear and see, and then to have that ability to look back. There's a book by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy called Gap in the Gain, and it's
Hmm.
it's for entrepreneurs, and a lot of entrepreneurs listen to this show. It's an interesting concept because we spend a lot of time in the gap. It's
Mhm.
I kick a 35-yard field goal, and I've got to kick a 40-yard field goal, or I make this much money if I only made this much money, or I'm
Right,
devout, but if I only could do more, and
right.
it's never enough. And when you look back on where you've come from to where you are today, that's called the gain. And it happens. And so many times in the day and in a year and just sometimes hours, you have to recenter
Right.
yourself to say, oh, wait. Remember where I was here, and this is where I
Right.
am now. And
Now.
so when you look back on family and all these things that we're talking about, that's where gratitude comes in. And it gets really easy to believe in God. It gets really easy to believe in blessings because you're so grateful for where you've come and the journey you have, not just the result, but the actual journey and the challenges and all the parts that go with it.
Right. The last chapter of my book is called The Hidden Virtue of Perseverance. And it's sort of, it's similarly, but looking, it's kind of that idea of, there are these big dramatic moments, there are these big life changing experiences, but there's so much of life that is lived in between those moments. And so it's when you said gap, that's kind of what I was thinking. And it may seem like nothing really significant is happening, or it may seem like you're kind of in the fog and you don't know what's happening. But when you look back on those times, you realize that there was a lot that was happening. You just weren't conscious of it, or you're being prepared for something, or you were aligning your life with something that had happened in the past, or healing was happening. There's just so many things that are are part of the invisible ways that small moments make that impactful difference in a life.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
powerful. I was having a
Yeah.
conversation with someone a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about their marriage, and they were divorcing the spouse, and they had spent all this time kind of living this Instagram lifestyle. It was big moments, big trips, traveling with the kids, and we didn't have enough time to go into the depth. But all I could think about for days after this conversation was I just wanted to say, hey, you know what's crazy? It's not all of the big things. It's all those little mundane things that you miss the most when someone's not there with you. It's when you go out of town, you miss sitting down to dinner with your family, or you miss sitting and watching a movie, or when they're not home anymore because they're teenagers and they're going out and they're doing other
Oh,
things. You miss the little tiny parts of the day, coming home from school, having a quick
right,
conversation. Life
right,
is full of little moments that we miss so often,
right,
and it really is interesting to me. And uh, there's a lot of truth in what you're saying with that powerful that gap is kind of where the good stuff lives.
right, right.
Well, obviously, we could talk all day. We have a great conversation. You've been a wonderful guest. Bishop Mariann Budde is somebody that's doing big things, that's writing great stuff, that's bringing people together. And I'm very grateful for you being on the show, having a great faith conversation with us. This is the first full faith conversation we've had on the show.
Okay.
We've dabbled, but we haven't gone to this depth. And so I'm grateful that we were able to do it together. And I thank
Thank
you
you.
for being a part of it.
Thank you. And God bless you, Scott, and all that you're doing and offering to not only the people in your immediate sphere, but to all those who are benefiting from this podcast and the other ways you are seeking to do good in the world. I'm so glad to have met you. And I wish you every blessing going forward.
The feeling's mutual. And for those of you
Thank
that want to
you.
follow her, she is on Instagram. You can buy her book on Amazon. And just one more plug. It's How We Learn to Be Brave. And I did hear her tell me that you actually were going to call it something else, I believe, right? The and
Yeah,
I can't
no, I was actually going to
decisive
call it with the
moments.
subtitle Decisive Moments in Life and Faith. That was my working title. And then the editor said, no, we're going to, and then How We Learn to Be Brave was, I had it reversed. And they said, no, we're going to flip it around the other way.
Yeah, that's how it works. Well, thanks so
That's
much
how
for
it,
joining me.
thank
Follow her,
you.
check her out. Thanks a lot.